Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Judging 101. I'm going to be kind of discussing how I evaluate the balance between choreography and vocals whenever I'm judging competitive show choir. My name is Annette Layman. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. I got my start very early dancing at the age of 7 and went to an amazing elementary school with an incredible music teacher who had us up on our feet dancing, doing musical theater kind of things. I made my musical theater debut in 2nd grade as the second of the 3 little pigs. And then went on to do show choir in junior high and high school, did musicals, actually started choreographing when I was in high school. My very first song was Why Do Fools Fall in Love for the girls ensemble in 11th grade. And then I went to college, studied dance ed, dance performance, and was able to go back to my old high school, my alma mater, and start the very first dance program there, which was really exciting. But in 1992, I went completely freelance and have spent many decades traveling around the country, working at different camps with different schools, and frankly, have been able to witness this evolution of this thing called show choir. It's just been quite amazing when I think back to the day that I was the second of the 3 little pigs in 2nd grade in the cafetorium. So anyway, let's kind of get into this subject here. So first of all, why do we have dance? Why do we have musical theater? Why are we moving to lyric? Well, really, dance is just another way to continue that story. It's a narration tool, and it's just an additional way beyond the lyric, beyond the music, to communicate what that song is about. And it just adds to the overall interest of a show package. So a couple of things that I want to talk about is kind of what I look for as a judge. First things first, I judge the sheet. Okay. Every competition is going to be different with those score sheets. So I don't go in there with a preset idea of I'm looking for this, 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 and this. As far as the categories, within those categories, there are some, things that I always look for. But I get a hold of that sheet, that judge's sheet, and I see the categories that I'm supposed to judge. So for example, one competition may have a category that's difficulty of movement. One competition may have one that specifically addresses movement and the vocal. So it just depends on the score sheet, but kind of encompassing all the possibilities is what I want to kind of just kind of discuss a few of the basics here. I just kind of started writing some stuff, so it may not be any kind of specific order. So hopefully the rambling won't be too difficult to follow. First of all, how do you know when the choreography is just too much? Obvious, they can't sing. They're not able to produce the sound. You're not able to understand the lyric. That's just when there's just too much movement. Another thing is when the movement kind of becomes distracting. That's what I call swatting flies. Like there's just so much going on that I can't even focus my eyes. And I'm totally not listening to the lyric. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on that stage. Another thing too, it can get distracting if it's unsafe. I've seen some stunts and some lifts and some things that really make me nervous as an audience member, that's distracting me from the main goal, which is the singing. And if just the interest is gone, if I'm looking at a group and I just find myself, wanting to do something else, wanting to take my little bathroom break, then that's just when it just gets a little bit overwhelming at that point. Also, whenever I see the students on stage with kind of panic faces, that kind of deer in headlights, that tells me that it's just a little bit too much for them to handle. And maybe it's their first time out. You kind of see a little bit of that, but it just might be a little too much choreography there. When is it not enough? Which happens when you can tell from a group that they have a lot more expertise than the level of difficulty that they've been given. That's one. The second thing is when the lyric is singing about this joint is jumping or disco inferno, and I'm seeing very minimal movement. I'm not seeing any kind of energy. I'm not seeing this joint jumping. I'm not seeing this big disco thing happening. And that's where we know that it's just not the energy that that song needs, that visual could really help convey and progress that story, that character of that song forward a little bit there. What are the characteristics that make choreography really help the vocals? This is a huge thing for me, okay? The vocal and the movement should run parallel. The vocal is priority. Singing comes first, show choir, okay? Singing comes first, but they should run parallel. So for example, if you're at a really quiet moment in the song, pianissimo, something like that, I don't want to see forte visual. So just like singing, movement has forte, pianissimo. So I want those to match. If I'm singing forte, I need big movement. If I have a crescendo, louder, 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 I need to see that building visually as well. If the singing is staccato versus legato, I need to see that also mirrored in the choreography. It's just really frustrating when we have this wonderful, lengthy phrase that's legato and very melodic, and then there's this kind of movement, just kind of chopping through it, very staccato. So again, all of that has to run very parallel. The next thing that's going to help is when you're teaching and rehearsing the choreography, make sure that you don't just use counts to teach movement. That's a great way to start. Okay, here's the next 8 counts. You teach those counts, but then you need to relate it to the lyric. This is where we go with that kind of thing. So make sure that that movement is matching the lyric, because they're not going to be singing that song and counting those counts. They're going to need to know how it relates to the lyric. And it's at that point that you can really go in and hammer in those lyrics. Teaching choreography is going to help them learn the lyrics. It's also going to help them learn dynamics. So if you have a crescendo and you've got their arms going up, guess what, kids? This is your crescendo. So you're running those parallel again right there too. What else? Oh, posture. Now I know there's some styles, grittier, down on the ground, you're dancing a little bit lower, but when you're doing things a little bit higher up here, posture is very important to teach. It's really going to help the vocals, because with that tall posture, with that lifting the sternum, it's going to give you room in here to get some good breath to support that sound, especially if you're dancing hard and you got to sing big chord at the end there, going into a dance break or something like that. So really teaching proper posture, it's going to help give you some space to get some real good breath in there to sing. There's a couple of things. Some common mistake. I've got a bunch of these just over the years having judged. Just some things to kind of remind you. Sacrificing vocals for movement, or doing movement for movement's sake. There's times that I'm judging, I'm just like, why are they doing that right now? That just doesn't make any kind of sense. And because they've added all that in there, it's there. I'm not hearing the vocals come first, and I'm not hearing those vocals. I'm not hearing the sound. They're not supporting the sound all the way through the end of a phrase. They're not doing it. They don't have the breath support to do that crescendo that we need. So make sure you watch that. When there is no connection of the movement to the lyric. Now, I'm not talking cheesy like, what time is it? You know, that kind of basic. But if it's a lyric about being optimistic and looking forward and there's hope, and your last pose, your head is down, that's not showing me hope. This is showing me hope. This is showing me hope. Lifting up nice and tall like that. If it's a 1920 song, give me Charleston, give me Scarecrow, give me some of those typical things that would be happening in that era, all right? Unless you're taking that song Charleston and you're updating it to a rap or something like that, obviously. But you need to make sure that your choreography, A, is either progressing the lyric, conveying the character, or it's appropriate for that era, for that style of choreography that you're doing. Next, distracting movement. We talked about this also when choreography is just too much. Another issue that I have sometimes is that groups want to choreograph everything. And it's, as an audience member, your eyes never get a rest. And when you, just like when you have vocals, you have dynamics. We talked about that earlier. You need to have dynamics in the visual as well. And again, those run parallel. Vocal dynamic, visual dynamic, and then that kind of gives you an ebb and flow to your show, which makes the pace really interesting. And I always equate like a show choir set to a roller coaster. What makes a roller coaster amazing, and I love roller coasters, is that it doesn't just do this at one tempo, at one level. It's going loop-de-loop. It's got corkscrews. It's got that chug, 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 chug up that hill before the big jump, the big turns. Or if you love Disney like I do and you ride Mount Everest, it's got that pull backwards before it takes off again. So that's what you want to equate your show to be. There needs to be all these things that make you always go, oh, that's cool. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Oh, I love that. Oh, that's really cool. So the vocal and the visual will run parallel in that way. So your choreography can't be, we're going to dance to every beat, every count of every single song, because if you do that, it just becomes like this. You need to add some interest in there with the choreography. There's ebb and flow and there's dynamics with both, which brings me to ballads. Don't always feel like you have to move in your ballad. If there's no place that calls for that kind of move, a big key change, something's happening in the lyric that makes you more determined to get up and do something or move to a partner and communicate with them, don't add movement. Let our eyes rest. Here's that ebb and flow to your show. Let our eyes rest and let us just listen to you sing really some beautiful moments in there. Give us that opportunity to kind of sit back. Give us that cool part of the roller coaster ride in there. Oh, appropriate for age. So when you have younger choirs that aren't as vocally trained, developed, able to support sound, don't have them dance so much. They don't need to look like high schoolers. Maybe they do, and that's great. If you've got a really talented group, that's wonderful. But don't force them into that older look as far as dancing so hard, so hard, so hard. They need to be able to sing. Focus on that singing first, and then add the movement as is appropriate. Not teaching proper technique. This goes back to the posture with the breast support, which is going to help them sing and with that proper technique. Another thing that I find sometimes is when a group only dances when there's a lyric. So for example, you've got a phrase and maybe there's 4 counts of no vocal and they just stand there. What that does is that puts a speed bump in the show. So you're gonna, the vocal energy and everything you've built energy-wise in that song kind of goes bloop, and then you got to get going again. So you want to use the choreography in that way to kind of propel the movement of the song through those empty measures. Like if it's not a dance break, you want to propel through those empty measures. Don't just stand there before you go on. Don't create those speed bumps in there. Let's see what else. Trying to look like other groups. There are many incredible groups out there doing this amazing show choir thing. And it seems like there are times when, especially if a group is getting started or you know, they're just a few years in, they look at that group and they go, oh my gosh, we want to do that. That would be so amazing. And yes, it is, but it took them a while to get there. So make sure that you are not trying to look like another group, okay? Evaluate your group where they're at vocally first, and then kind of decide what movement you can add after that. Incorrect choices. So you always, again, we talked about the movement needs to relate to the lyric or the character. And if you're doing Footloose, for example, the choreography should be a lot with your feet, not with your arms. So think about that for a second. Think about the lyric. Footloose, use your feet, not just your arms. So really think about those lyrics and how you want to address a song there. some judging score sheets have that difficulty of movement category, which I love. And I think that that's very important to really reward groups that are kind of up in their game a little bit and adding more complicated moves and learning some new things, which is great if they do it correctly. So don't just add more difficult movement to get those points on that score sheet, because if you add the difficult movement and you can't do it and it's sacrificing the vocals, then those points are going to come down a little bit in that category for that. They still have to master it if you want to have that difficulty level there. Contrasting tracks. So a basic example, guys are singing one vocal track, girls are singing, I'm not just talking notes, but I'm talking different vocal lines. You want to have two different contrasting tracks. You need to make sure that those contrasting tracks are visibly very different to show that contrast that's happening in those vocal lines as well. If they're too close together, then it's going to get a little bit muddy visually there. We kind of talked about this with that empty measure, that speed bump. The same thing goes with transitions in a song. So you get to the end of a phrase and you've got 8 counts to move to a partner or move to a different blocking. You need to keep the energy that you were just creating vocally and visually. You got to keep the energy going in that transition as well. And that's going to help your singers. It doesn't give them that speed bump that they've got to speed back up from again. Watch those transitions. Not adding, backtrack. When things get dancier as you are singing and get more complicated and get more active, you have to adjust your vocals. You've got to sing more percussively. You really got to hit those consonants. So make sure that in each part of your song, you're evaluating vocally and choreographically. Here's what we're doing choreographically. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff going on right here. We really got to make sure that we bump those vocals up a little bit more as well. And if it doesn't work, you need to pull back on that choreography a little bit. What else? That's it. What advice would I give directors and choreographers when planning shows and thinking about balancing their vocal and their movement? First of all, I'll say it over and over and over again, singing comes first. Singing comes first. When I was young and started choreographing, I was thinking, we got to add all this cool movement in there. I want to do this and this trick and this stunt and this effect. And I wasn't thinking about the vocal part of it. And that can be kind of a mistake you run into, especially when you get excited, you got some really cool ideas as directors, but you really want to make sure you get that singing down first and then add that movement and be ready to adapt it as need be. And along those same lines, make sure the choreographer and the vocal director are working closely together. I always loved it when the vocal director stayed in the room with me during a choreography rehearsal so that they could lean over and go, hey, Annette, you know, this part, we really need a crescendo going into this section, or I think we really want to add a key change here, or vice versa. I would say to the vocal director, what would be really nice kind of in this section here is to kind of pull back and go to an a cappella whisper shout moment. What do you think about that? And we really kind of work together and shape the song. They're not two separate entities. Parallel, parallel, parallel. Just as the vocal and the choreography work parallel, the vocal director and the choreographer need to work parallel and be on the same page. You don't want to confuse those kids, okay? Make sure that they've got a clear path of what they need to do, Let's see what else. Oh, another thing that I'm a big proponent of is teaching kids how to breathe during dance breaks or between songs. A lot of times when they get to, when people are doing a really complicated dance break, they may not know it, but they're holding their breath because they're thinking about so many other things that have to happen. And they may not know it, but they're holding their breath. So just like in modern dance, just like in yoga, you want to teach them how to breathe and control their breath in those dance breaks, especially if it's towards the end of the show and they've really got to drive it home and they need some stamina, they need some breath to make it through the end of the show. And also between songs, teaching them how to breathe, making breath a part of the choreography is going to be a big help there. And finally, vocal directors. If you're rehearsing, your choreographer has left and you're rehearsing the show and it's just not working, let your choreographer know. They can come back in and help you, or you probably have some ideas as well to kind of adapt to that. And that, it goes a long way to really knowing your group first. When you teach them those vocals, you get the vocals where you want, there's a natural time where the choreographer comes in and those vocals go away. And that's the old joke of choreographers put the harm in harmony. So there's that moment where the vocals go here and the choreography comes in, but then you want those vocals to go right back up to where they were when they were just standing there and singing their hearts out. So if you can't get those vocals back up to where you want them to be, then let your choreographer know, or many of you are very expert at doing this yourselves, adjusting that choreography back down to where it needs to be. And maybe it's less footwork. Maybe it's continuing a move a little bit longer than maybe ba, 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 to something a little bit more like this, adjusting that choreography so that they can sing. So I know that I was kind of rambling a lot, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions or need some more explanation to some of my ramblings for all this. But thank you, Damon, for doing this. I think that this is just a really, really spectacular idea to do. And I also want to huge applause to all you directors and choreographers and parents and kids out there that are really keeping this show choir thing alive during these challenging times. It's so important beyond music for these kids. And it's just very inspired by seeing everything that you all have done. So keep it up, onward, upward.